I knew I should have brought a box for the podium to stand on. It's too tall for me. So, welcome everyone. Welcome to our convention. I'm going to do a little bit of housekeeping first and say what's around here. If people need the bathrooms, they're outside to the left and the right. I know everybody's found the drinks and food in back of us, and thanks so much for everybody contributing to that. There's also, I think most people wrote in the sign-in book that's on the first table that you first come in, but please do sign in the book for us. And then to the far left over here where you see flowers and pens, we have some poster boards for people to make a little drawing or write their name, or we have lots of room for that. And then the tables that we have set up that celebrate Martin's life is we have a family table over there with lots of photos. And then on this side over here, we have racing, we have art, we have games and film, and favorites, which we'll talk a lot about his favorites, of which there are so many. And so as what's being passed out to everyone is a coloring book. So a couple weeks ago, I was talking to somebody, I said, you know, you've really made it when you can make a coloring book out of your life. And so that was my idea, but Devin, who's sitting over here, made it real. So she did all the hard work. And so I'm going to attempt to do a timeline of some of Martin's life and some of the things in it. And it really is a coloring book. I mean, you really can color in it. And we have a baby here today too, which is a wonderful thing. I'm going to do some thank yous at the beginning. Last weekend we were at Nick's graduation up at DigiPen in Washington for his graduation ceremony, and we laughed because they saved the thank yous till the end, and everybody was so ready to leave, and they went on another 5 minutes thanking everybody. So I'll do thank yous at the beginning. So thank you for the food, of course. Thank you for April, the incredible baker from the Thompson family, who did a lot of baking, and we have other cookies there too. Thank you for the setup to Devin's family, for Suzanne and Adrian, for all the beautiful setup of the flowers and how all the tables are set up. Thank you to everyone who's here. There's lots of other people that sent their wishes, and since this is being recorded, they'll be able to hear about it. So I would like to introduce the coloring book that you should have. So first of all, I thought, who the heck has 4 names? Well, Martin did. So it was Martin, MG, Marty, and Bucky Starr. So they're all here. And I finally tracked down, there's a quote from Firesign Theater. If you don't know Firesign Theater, you can look it up and see if you like the humor. I think we're all bozos on this bus is a famous quote from Firesign Theater. And it was Steve Dooner, his childhood friend, and the two of them loved Firesign Theater. So I finally tracked down who did that. So one of the things is, to me, we're here to celebrate Martin, and we're here to celebrate all of our connections. Martin's life was like a series of Venn diagrams. Some of them intersected and some of them didn't, but it's just a huge amount of people that he knew and touched and filmed and drew and raced and just so many different things. And it's really wonderful to see people here and to have people getting together to talk with each other. The other reason to me that we're really here is because of Nicholas, and I think most people got to say hi to him, or Nick, Nicholas or Nick, because Nick and I were talking about this, that when Nick was born, it was pretty late in my and Martin's life, and he did not meet a lot of the people or know a lot of Martin's life before that. So there's a lot that he didn't know. He was really part of the racing community, but not a lot of other people. So I just wanted to encourage those people to contact Nick and send stories or send pictures, and because there's so much more to learn. So I'm going to try to do a little bit of a timeline I was telling Bob Frieden this. I'm going to try to do a timeline, which is practically impossible with Martin because there was so much that happened, and I'm probably going to get a bunch wrong. So the program is that I'm going to speak, and Nick's going to speak, Leslie, Martin's sister, is going to speak. Then we can have an open mic, so if there's anybody who'd like to add anything, a story, or just anything, we can pass the mic around. Then we have some things at the end, too. So I met Martin in 1978 when I graduated with a library science degree. And I remember meeting his family, which was the opposite of my family. Here they are over here. They were... I'm just going to be honest here. They were loud. They were funny. They were chaotic. But they loved to cook, too. But the loud and chaotic part wasn't really like my family. So I think so Martin kind of liked my quiet side of the family, so we kind of met up with that. The other thing is both Martin and I talked all the time. So we weren't in competition a lot for talking, but talking and we had a lot of things that we wanted to accomplish in our lives. I didn't have a full-time job, so I worked at the Fireplace Bookshop in Birdcage Walk in Sacramento, where I hope I'm getting this right, Jim. Bridget McKenna worked there, and at that time, you were dating Bridget. I hope that's right. Okay, good. I don't want to get that wrong. But because of that connection at the bookshop, which Martin and I read a book, and that's The White Dragon by Anne McCaffrey, third in the series. It just come out, and he ordered it. That's the book we met over. And so at that time, that connection drew us into science fiction fandom. And there's a lot of people here who were part of that fandom and conventions that we did. So to go through the coloring book here, I just wanted to mention that race cars come up first because race cars were huge in Martin's life. You see race cars, and he had an enormous amount of books. Then there was Big Daddy Ed Roth, so if you look at the Ed Roth pictures, and if you're not familiar with Ed Roth and you look him up, he was just an artist that my brother grew up with too. There were all these models. It was a certain kind of artwork that was really big in that time period. And there's the VW, of course. Get to the airplanes after that. At the same time, Martin was also sailboarding. He had also done racing with his friend Steve Lady, and he won first place in a race up in Portland. We still have the flag for that. Let's see. Oh, and I almost forgot. So when he went to Sac State, he was making films with Bob Frieden and Dave Bengal, who are here today. So that was when we were in Sacramento. So somewhere, where are you guys? Where'd you guys go? Where's Bob? Raise your hand, Bob. Where's Bob? Oh, there's Bob, way back there. So somewhere there must be some film, right, that we can see? Is it still alive? Okay. Yeah. So that was a really great time too. Okay. Okay. So that was another thing that was going on. When we got involved in fandom, Martin got really into airbrush, doing airbrush work, and one of his pieces is over here. Greetings from Io is over here. He also did Wonderland Next Exit, which is a Cheshire cat, and Sunburn at Silicon Valley, which was from a drawing that Jim McLeod did, and I've now forgotten the other one. There's another one too. The teddy bear, yes, the teddy bear. The teddy bear is in the book. Past the airplanes there is a line drawing of the teddy bear that Martin did in airbrush, and Suzanne painstakingly took the airbrush drawing and did a black and white out of it. So that was a print that Martin sold, and he sold quite a lot of them. It was really nice. Let's see. I'm going to get some of this off. Let's see. I'm off wrong. Okay, so also my brother Jeff joined fandom at the same time, so Jeff was really, really involved in fandom also. So I know there's some people here from the fandom time, and Jim McLeod is here, and Debbie's here, and Joel is here. I'm not sure. I think that's the main people who are here. Then, where am I? Okay, so then Martin decided he wanted to do film. Santa Monica, and he was roommates with Gordon, who isn't here yet, but we'll hope he'll make it soon, Gordon Garb. And he, there were 3 of them in Santa Monica. He tried to get into the film industry, didn't really work out too well. So I moved back up where we got married and moved to Petaluma. That's when Nicholas was born. We fell in love with Petaluma. But also, after before that was when Martin joined Lucasfilm Games. And so I know there's some people from Lucasfilm Games, and I know Steve Purcell is here. And I'm not sure how many other people are here from Lucasfilm Games, because I can't even remember. Back there, so Brent and Leela and Frank and Ken. People who raised their hand were Lucasfilm Games, LucasArts, then became Totally Games. And we have boxes of the games over here. So the World War II, I know there were the humorous games like Zach McCracken, and then there were the World War II simulation games. And man, so do you know what years those were? Anybody? Kind of what years? Like what was it? 86 through 89. Thank you, Ken. I'll be contacting you about that timeline. So those are the games. One of the interesting things to me, and in the book here, are some airplane coloring pages. And all these coloring pages are from the Dover coloring books, which we all grew up with. And that company's still around. You can still get the coloring books. Was that in order to make those games, you had to build the little models. So I remember when we lived in Cotati before that, Martin built the little models, and so you're taking pictures of the little models, and so it's not like you're building it in 3D in quite the same way in a computer, so it was a lot of work. It was a tremendous amount of work, but those are really, really popular games, and I know Martin all the time met people who remembered those games. I mean, it's just, Star Wars, and did Star Wars X-Wing. Yes, there's a connection there with you, isn't there? Yeah. He wanted me to mention that. So, let's see. When Martin left Totally Games, he did a lot of contract work. He worked at Namco on the Pac-Man games when Namco was, I don't know what Namco is doing now, but when they were working on the Pac-Man games. And then he went back to one of his first loves of his life, which is racing, which was in his family. So will the racers in the room please raise their hand, because there's a huge table of racers over there. So Formula V is what he raced, and if you're not familiar with it, you can look up Formula V. It's a tinkering kind of racing, it seems to me. It's something you work on it a lot, and it's not like, it's not like the horribly expensive racing, but it costs enough. It costs enough. But Nick grew up with all of these people, and it really was a great family. It was great weekends to get together and see people working on stuff. And you can still it's what you were saying yesterday when we were going by the racetrack, that it was nice to hear the racing sound at the Petaluma racetrack last night. That was really nice. And then he started airbrushing helmets. He was just insane sometimes. So some of the helmets that he airbrushed are over on the table. It's like, talk about something that you spend an enormous amount of time and money and you get like nothing back for that, because you can't charge enough for that. That was one of Martin's issues, was he never could charge enough for a lot of the stuff he did because it just took too much time. And when racing kind of stopped, then he did a lot of contract work again, and web hosting and editing and animation. Anything that would take to feed his passions and make a living. So I would like to, excuse me, Ratfink, I would like to talk a little bit about the last couple years in Martin's life, because some people might not have had as much contact with him. And many of you may know that he had congestive heart failure. That was diagnosed 5 years ago. It's not a good thing. It's not a good diagnosis. It has, it isn't a good thing to have. And you have to really take care of what you eat, take care of yourself. But it's hard. It's really hard. And we didn't want to talk about it. It's like, who do you talk to when you have things like that? Nick and I didn't want to talk about it. So for many years after that he was not really in a good place. And when my brother passed away 4 years ago in the spring, and our dog passed away at the same time, it really, really, really hit Martin hard. I mean, it was really tough. And I used to go out driving and taking photographs. I haven't even mentioned photography, which was one of his great loves, and for a long, long time. So it was really tough. And a really, really, when he was really down a couple years ago, a very, very, very good friend actually called the police, who came to the house, and he was taken to hospital. And he got the help he needed. And the reason I want to mention that is because if it happens to people in your life and you don't know what to do, which I didn't know what to do, that can be something that really changes their life. So he went to therapy and he got medication, which he'd never really stuck to before, and he stuck with it. And he'd been doing really well the last year and a half and 2 years. He had a couple jobs. One was at Art and Soul in Sebastopol. Another one was a printing company in Santa Rosa, which he really enjoyed. But after the fires in Sonoma County, they laid off some people, and he was one of them. So he was very disappointed in that. But he had the opportunity then to focus on a project that he and his friend Bob Vardaman had been talking about for a long, long time. So I don't even know how to describe Arcanium Engineering, Steampunk, Penny Dreadfuls. You can look it up. It's on Patreon. So Bob Vardaman was writing the stories, and Martin was doing the illustrations. And in the book, let's say in the book somewhere, I don't even know if I've zipped through a bunch of things. But in the book, past the teddy bear, past Cthulhu, is 2 illustrations from that work. This really thick paper here. So there's 2 different illustrations from his steampunk days, I guess. And he was really enjoying that, and he was starting to color them. And they were having so much fun. He and Bob Vardaman were talking every day, and every Friday a new issue would come out. So it was really great. He had a wonderful last weekend of his life. He talked to friends. There's so many people that he talked to that weekend. He had Nick would call us every Sunday, the family, and we'd talk. He had a conversation with Nick on that Sunday, and he he was really excited to take a picture of a double rainbow because we had a storm that day, and he was driving. Oh, and you know, the other thing I wanted to mention, he had nachos. He mentioned how much Debbie and Jim, he enjoyed having nachos that day. Not sure he was supposed to eat those very much, but he said, we had nachos. Debbie said, let's have nachos. So it was driving back on Adobe Road, and often against those hills you get rainbows and double rainbows. And he took a picture, and he came in and he showed me on his phone. He said, look what I saw. And that was the last posting. If you're friends with him on Facebook, that was the last posting he made with that double rainbow. And he was feeling great about projects. He was working on all different kinds of things. He was working on films. He was working on 3D modeling. And he finished the day with his favorite snacks, which are 2. One we're going to pass out to everybody if they want it, which is the Pockies. They're from Thailand. They're little sticks with chocolate or strawberry on them. And the Trader Joe's soy chocolate chip cherry ice cream. It's like another one of his favorite things. So I'm going to end with saying that Martin was such a big guy in so many ways. I don't mean physically, I just mean a big guy. I mean, he had his loves, his hates, his passions, his resentments. I mean, they're huge. I mean, I'm not going out on a limb here to say he could be a really difficult person. And we had a difficult relationship. So it's like, but, you know, there was just so many parts to him. He never forgot anything, which Leslie can attest to, which is good and bad. I mean, it's good to remember, but sometimes it's good to be able to forget things. And that wasn't an easy thing for him. He had the biggest sigh. It's like I would say to him, how can you sigh that big? You know, it's like but it's like it was huge. You walk down the hall and I hear, oh. He says, well, that's just me. Okay, you know. So, and he could, and when he cried, man, it was his whole body. He could really, really cry. He loved celebrations and parties. He loved people getting together. He loved telling stories. If it was a birthday party, you had to have food. You had to have a big bunch of people. You had to have balloons and presents. Otherwise, it just wasn't a birthday. I mean, so we had him that way because he loved holiday decorations because we were huge into Halloween and Christmas and everything too. But most of all, he had a really big laugh, and I think and smile. And I think some of the pictures that we have over there really shows the big smile that he had when so many times. He loved to tell unique and humorous stories and share them with as many people as he could. I have no idea what happens to us after we pass. I have no idea. I do hope at least he could spend a little time with Jeff, on a road trip and have some really good laughs. My brother Jeff. He truly made a difference in many people's lives. I mean, he just really, really did. So I'm going to pass the mic to you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm really glad to see everyone here. It means so much to see everyone who my dad affected, and a lot of you guys who some of you guys I haven't met, but I know of you. Some of you I haven't seen in a long time, and it's good to see all of you again. Before I actually start on everything that I already prepared, I actually want to add a little bit of an addendum to my dad's last day. So when he was chasing that rainbow, as poetic as it is, my last conversation with my dad was actually him literally chasing that rainbow because he was driving while talking to me. And occasionally getting out of the car, stopping, getting out of the car, taking a picture, getting back in, and then going, I gotta get closer to it. I gotta drive farther. So, weirdly enough, my last conversation with my dad, well, he said a lot of stuff that was great in it, but he also was literally chasing a rainbow, which seems absolutely ridiculous, all things considered. But yeah, since my dad passed, I haven't spoken about it a lot publicly. I wanted to make a post on Facebook. I did that when my dog passed. When both my animals passed, I did it when Jeff passed too. It always just kind of felt like the right thing to do. But I think, especially after Jeff, it was hard to figure out how to do it again. And there was so much to sum up that it just seemed impossible. And whenever I sat down, it kind of, the unfairness of it really welled up, especially considering, as a lot of you know, my dad passed right before a bunch of big life events for me. So it was right, he knew most of them were coming, but, he missed out on those. And when I sat down to write my eulogy, I think the temptation was to focus on that stuff, which is the sadness, the fact he's not here, but this is a celebration of his life, and I think what's a much better thing to focus on is all the positive things. Of all the moments I'm sad, wrong thing, the wonderful parts of him, and I wanted to focus, because I was his only child, I want to focus on the things he passed on to me, the lessons and experiences that I'm going to carry forward, and this ended up taking the form of a bulleted list, which isn't exactly elegant, but, here it goes. The first one had to be my dad's curiosity and all of his varied interests. My mom was going through that timeline. There's so much, it's even hard to cover through a timeline of his life because he was interested in so many things. He had a curiosity to him like anyone else I knew, and he had an ironclad memory, which my mom also mentioned. Unfortunately, I did not inherit that from him, but I'm proud to say that we shared that curiosity. Those Sunday conversations when I talked to my dad could meander for an hour or 2 hours on all kinds of stuff. And one of the great things about my dad is he could talk about basically anything with anyone and at least hold his own a little bit. His love for the road was something he definitely passed on to me. So my earliest memories are drives with my dad. I think there's one picture up there of me and him standing outside of Fort Bragg, just against a car. When I was young, he would drive me up and down, and when I was a teenager, it became less frequent, but we did it occasionally, and that was prime dad-son time, let's talk out how horrible it is being a teenager kind of stuff. And that ended up kind of making me look at driving as something that was relaxing, though I never ended up getting into racing, unfortunately. But I did end up getting a desire to explore, and as some of my friends over there know, we ended up going on 3 road trips, 3 years back to back, which ended up creating a lot of my favorite memories, and I definitely can attribute my desire to do that to those early experiences with my dad. He taught me to value myself and my work. That was something he struggled with at times, but something my dad always did was whenever he struggled with something, he definitely found a way to turn that into a lesson to me about how I should not struggle about those things. So over the last year and a half, I've actually had a lot of success with my own work and where I'm going to be going. I'll talk about that a little later at the end, but a lot of the times when I was talking to my dad, I would say, I've gotten very lucky. After all of this, I got really lucky. I'm in a really good place. And my dad would always stop me and he'd be like, no, you worked really hard to get where you are and you're not allowed to forget it, which is something I really appreciate. And even when talking to some of you guys today, I started saying I've been very lucky, and then I catch myself because I hear him saying that in my head. I definitely can't not mention that we shared games. Like I said, I don't really have my dad's memory. I don't have a lot of memories from when I was younger. I always remember that my dad could go when I was 3, I remember the inside of my house with every detail, and I could tell you every detail about the inside of my house. And I'm like, I can hardly remember when I was 8. I don't have no idea what you're talking about. But I remember when I was 4, and my dad came home, from the insane commute he ended up doing between Petaluma and San Jose, which I'll talk a little bit more about. And he had a PS1 and a copy of the first Spyro game. And I remember that because that was my introduction to really gaming. And then later on, I ended up playing World of Warcraft with both my dad and my uncle. And at times, that was actually how we communicated, because he went to go to a job in Austin for I think about a year. And we couldn't actually spend time together like we had before he left, so we actually would just play the game together. So in a lot of ways, we had a strong connection through that, even though he didn't end up gaming too much past that. I want to mention, it's not really something he taught me, but my dad was also really dedicated to giving me a home. He would talk a lot about how when he was younger, he would move around. And even when, as you heard from my mom giving the timeline, he moved around a lot in his adult life too. But I ended up living in the same house, and even right now, at 24, I'm in that same house that I grew up with my entire life while I'm getting ready to move. And I mentioned the San Jose drive, which is crazy, especially having learned about crunching in the industry and commutes and how soul-crushing commutes can be. Him doing a 2-hour each-way commute is absolutely insane. But it didn't only extend, that home feeling didn't only extend to the sacrifices he made so I could have that home, but also his relationship with my friends. To a lot of my friends, my dad was like an uncle or second dad, and he always referred to them as his other kids. I think that really gave me a good sense of belonging, especially into my teenage years after that had been there for a long time. And actually, as a side note on that, and I mentioned this to some of you guys already, my dad had an incredible sense of prescience when it came to me and my friends' lives. He predicted that me and my friend Stu were going to live together in college, and even stuck to his guns when I moved away to Washington and Stu was still here in Petaluma. Turns out the next year Stu ended up going to the same school, and we did end up being roommates. But the one I'm always going to be grateful for, which I've now heard from multiple people, was that even though my dad missed Devin and my engagement, I guess that was a week and a half ago, it wasn't even that long ago, 2 weeks maybe, he had not only predicted it, but I talked to his friend Steve Lady a week ago, and Steve had pushed back and been like, oh no, there's no way they're going to get married, they're really young, give them time, people don't do that so quickly these days. And he said, no, they're going to get engaged soon, and they're going to get engaged right before he graduates, which is literally exactly what happened, which is ridiculous. So luckily, one of the things I don't have to worry about is whether my dad knew I was going to get engaged. And I think one of the biggest things for my dad was he taught me to have fun and to make stories and memories. My mom mentioned this, but my dad was a big guy. He had a big personality, and it's probably going to be impossible to really forget that about him. He had an infectious laugh, and he, even in the hard times, had a sense that he was really brimming with life. And he lived life to the fullest, and I remember there was one time when his friend Steve Lady visited us in town, and they were talking about how their whole thing was live life so you have a bunch of stories when you're old, so when people are around you, you can tell them all the stories of your life, and they can be jealous of your life. And, I think that's something you can pull a lot of inspiration from, and I don't even know if, even with like 20 more years, I don't know if I could have heard every story that my dad could have told me about his life. It was just an infinite well where, you know, he's like, I don't know if I repeated this, and I'm like, no, you did not repeat this because you have so many of these. The only regret there is I wish he'd written more of them down so that I could have them. Well, it's true, maybe he's got them written down somewhere. Well, that's it for my bulleted list. At the end of the day, I wouldn't be who I am without my dad. He wasn't just my dad, but a friend and an inspiration. When I was a kid, and now's the time for me to get really choked up and have trouble talking. When I was a kid, I wanted to be an artist more than anything in the world so I could be like him. And though I didn't end up becoming an artist, I am a creator, and in other ways, I ended up following in his footsteps more closely than he could have imagined when I was as long as his forearm, which is always how he described me as a baby. The amount of times I came home from college and my dad would like stand in my doorway at night and be like, I can still remember when you were as long as my forearm. Like, that's what you say every time I'm home. But yeah, I'm not only going to be going into the games industry, which is one of the many things my dad did in his life, but my first professional project will be on a Star Wars game, which is an incredibly crazy coincidence. Which in the end my dad ended up making a legacy in at least one of the many things that he did in his life. And on my desk at work, I will be keeping a model of a TIE Defender, which is the X-Wing my dad designed, and he gave me a little one to put on my desk during my internship and I forgot to. But it's definitely going there now as a reminder of where I came from. Thank you for everything you gave me, Papa. I will never forget everything you taught me, and though I wish you could have stayed with us longer, you made it a hell of an impact while you were here. And now I will pass it over to my Aunt Leslie.
Okay, so you're all put it next to my mouth. I'm Martin. It tells you two things. I'm loud, and I won't know when to shut up. I'm the one who's here to tell you about the time before you knew him, when actually I'm the one with the memories left. So I'm going to start with the beginning. On November 3rd, 1956, my parents had a treat for us. We got into our pajamas and we sat in front of the black and white TV and we watched the first showing of The Wizard of Oz. Now, my parents were trying to give us a treat, but they didn't realize that two things were going to happen. First off, that trees that throw apples, evil flying monkeys, and witches that disappear in fire are really terrifying for a 7 and a 5-year-old. And the second one was that my mother was going to go into labor. It was kind of like an I Love Lucy episode. We're crying and screaming. Mom's 9.5 months pregnant, trying to get rid of us. My dad called her best friend, Jean. Jean came over, took care of us. Dad went back to bed and went to sleep. Martin was born the next day. I had always wanted a sister because I had a brother already, and he was not worth the effort. So I really wanted a sister, and so my mom's friend, Jean, offered to trade him for a pony, and I considered it. But I knew my folks would get mad, so I kept him. I remember walking down the street the next day. I'm 7 years and 1 week old, and I'm doing this. I have a baby brother! Why I was in the middle of the street, I do not know. I have a baby brother! And I was so proud. It was almost like the Queen, yes? I'm the one you know has a baby brother. It was very exciting. I used him for show and tell the next day. Well, my mother went into labor at about 11 o'clock at night, and now I have a baby brother. He was, okay, I have to tell you something. My mother always liked him best. And I think it was because they tried really hard to have a lot of kids, and they just had the three of us, and that was it. So there's a little book on the table over there next to the picture of him as a 3-year-old. On the front of the book, it says, The Cameron Family. I found this after my mother passed away. You open it up, there's not a picture of any of us but Martin. It is totally Martin. I'm a little offended by that, I have to tell you. I think there was a picture of Nick, but I took it out. He was the greatest little brother in the world. Actually, after I got over, missing the pony, I really, really loved this kid a whole lot. He was so cute. He looked like my mom would dress him in those fluffy little suits, and he had this yellow hair that stood up and this great smile, and he looked like a baby chicken. And he had the best laugh ever. I mean, you could make him laugh, he would laugh forever. He thought I was hilarious, so that was a plus right there. He was also absolutely the most annoying person I ever knew in my entire life. Some of you understand this, because you're the people that he would talk to me about. I'll get into the telephone calls later. One of my great ambitions was to tease him. He was 7 years younger than me, and I thought it was either my duty or just that's why God gave him to me. So I would tell him things when he was really small and just barely able to understand, and I said he was a twin, and the other twin passed away. And I told him once, one of the twins died, and we don't know which one. We don't know who you are. And the look on his little face was like, oh, geez, I don't know who I am now. Oh, sorry, rat thing. So anyway, I also told him once, and I know some of you have told your siblings this, I remember sitting on the couch, and he's on my mom's lap, and I'm leaning against my mom, and I said, they're not your real parents. And my mom's sitting right there, and she's totally ignoring us. And I'm like, they found you and brought you home because they felt sorry for you. And he was like, Mama, you're not my mama. And she's like, oh, be quiet, I'm watching TV. So he spent his whole life with older people and the two siblings and adults. Adults loved him because it was discovered quite early that he was really bright. And so when he went to kindergarten, he went around touching everybody. He was 4 years old, and he'd never been around kids before. So he kept hugging all the kids. He would hug them, and he would just lay his head against them. So the teacher, and mind you, this is 1962, somewhere around there, 1960. She calls my mom in because she's worried. She says to my mom, I think your child is a latent homosexual. My mother said, what? She said, oh, she's always touching people. He's even kissed a couple of them. It's like, and she said, he's 4 and he has no friends. Get over yourself, lady. By the time he was in school, as I said, they had discovered he was quite bright, so they put him into the gifted program, and he was learning Spanish in kindergarten and everything. But Martin, and you know this, he had no people skills. Those people skills did not ever come to the forefront. There was no way to explain to him how someone felt if he didn't think that's the way they should feel. So we spent a lot of times on the phone with him telling me, do you know what happened? He used to go to school in junior high. Now, you remember junior high. It was like the worst part of your life. He went to school in a hat, because that way he could walk by the cute girls and go, good afternoon, ma'am. Now, I don't think you're already a nerd, because he was a nerd. But when you do this, there isn't a girl there that will go after you. Not a girl. He also was the ideal little brother when I had a date. I'm 7 years older. So when I was in high school and started dating, okay, here's this kid with a genius IQ. And all of a sudden, when some guy walks in to see me, which was quite exciting, so would Martin. And he'd have a book on air travel under his arm, little chubby blonde kid who would say to my date, did you know? And it would be like the circumference of the sun is such and such and such and such. And the only answer that was good was, really? That's very interesting. There wasn't a teenage boy that could say that. They all said, no, I don't think that's right. I don't think that. Do you know how embarrassing it is to watch a 9-year-old giving facts. He's pulling them out of the air. They're all right. And the guy is going, no, you're only 9. You don't know that stuff. And I'm like, oh, geez, I'm so embarrassed. He's not coming back. Oh, my gosh. So what he did was he made it into a money-making operation. And this one guy, it all started with one guy who made a big mistake. Martin plopped down next to him. And the guy said to him, what can I give you to get rid of you? And he said, a quarter. I think he thought about it before because he didn't even hesitate. You can give me a quarter. So the guy pulls out a quarter. You can bet he never missed a time when that young man came to our house. Oh, dear. All right, so he made a lot of money because, you know, back then a quarter was worth a lot. I mean, that was it. Our dad built cars, and first he started with airplanes, then he did go-karts, then he did cars. He was one of the first people to actually design Formula V cars, which is how Martin got into Formula V. My dad would design and sell the designs. So he and my brother Maurice spent a lot of time in the garage. And back then, sad to say, girls didn't get invited, so I don't know how to fix a car. But to me, I thought every guy could take a motor apart and stick it back, engine apart, take it back together. No, my husband could barely change the oil. But it was something that they loved together. And after, you know, he was the baby. So after we were gone, my dad bought him a race car, and they toured the country, and he won his first race, which he always said was a really bad thing because then he expected to win every other race, and he never won another one. So, but he was so smart, and that was something he could do. He loved to build stuff. He was always kind of an artist. We all were kind of artsy, and so we just figured, well, that's the way. We didn't think he was going to make a living at it. I thought he was going to just fleece my boyfriends for the rest of my life. He was also almost always a smart aleck. So Steve Dooner, some of you may know Steve Dooner. He and Steve Dooner went to high school together, and Steve Lady, but Steve Lady did not take German. Steve Dooner and Martin took German one year. And at the end of the year, the teacher said if Dooner and Cameron were in her class next year, she was giving up teaching. And she meant it. One time there was a question. The question was, I'm sorry, I thought this was really funny. Oh, I have to tell you, he read the book, The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, and he loved it. He found Nazis, he wasn't trying to be a Nazi, but he found them very interesting, you know, the whole culture, the whole war and everything. So, in German, that's why he took German. In German, there was a question that said, name 3 countries that speak primarily German. He put Germany, Austria, and Argentina. And my mother again got called into the office, and I believe that's when the teacher declared that she would not be returning if he and Dooner were in the class. Oh gosh, I could go on, but I know you guys have a lot to say too. It's funny that Lori mentioned the airbrushing, because I remember my husband was overseas, he was a Marine, and so my daughter and my brand new baby son, and we lived with my parents, so Martin was next door. In the next room, and he got the airbrush. Now, I'm his older sister. I adored him. He was my favorite relative. He always was, even when he was being a doofus. And he would be in his bedroom airbrushing, and I would hear it, and then it would stop. And he'd run next door, knock on the door, open the door, and he'd have this horribly messy piece of something, like paper. I know he did a couple of T-shirts, and he'd go, look what I did! And I wanted to say, what is that? But and now you all know, he actually sold his airbrushing. He taught airbrushing, you know? So I'm glad I didn't discourage him in saying, that's the ugliest thing I ever saw in my life. He was so funny. He made me laugh from the time he was little. And of course, he thought I was hilarious. He was the best little brother ever. He was funny, he was loud, he gave me great stories. We were so lucky these last few years since my mom passed away. He had a hard time with my mom having Alzheimer's because he wanted to remember her the way she was. So he kind of stepped out of her life, and I'd call him up and yell at him, get out of here, and he'd say, no, I can't see her that way. But after she passed away, we got really close, and we talked 2 or 3 times a week at least. The last few weeks of his life, he discovered Marco Polo. I don't know if you know what that is. It's a video. It's a video. You can leave a video for someone. So I was inundated with these Marco Polos to the point where I have one Marco Polo where I just look at the camera and go, "You are so weird." And that was the whole thing. So the day that he passed away, I got a Marco Polo and I was thinking, okay, I'm going to call him tomorrow because I got this going, this going, this going. And I have tomorrow off. It was the first day of spring break. I'm a special ed teacher. So when Lori called me and I found out that he was gone, huge shock, I could not watch that Marco Polo because total guilt. I didn't want to hear him say, "Why are you calling me back? I know that you're there, so call me back." But he didn't. About 2 weeks later, I finally listened to it. And it was a goodbye. He talked to me about how he thought he didn't have much longer to go. This was the day of the night that he passed away. And he said, "I just want you to always remember that I loved you." And I thought, how special that I could have that, and it's on my phone, it's not going anywhere, that he got to say goodbye to me even if I didn't get to say goodbye to him. I think he's here. I do have a religious belief. I think he and Bruce and my dad and Jeff are all having a party. I think that he's meeting people he never met before. I think that he's probably sitting over there somewhere laughing at all of us. And I miss him every day. There have been so many times when I say, "Oh, look at that, I gotta tell Martin." So I just want to tell you this one last story. When he was driving, and he used to drive all over in Petaluma, and he would call me while he was driving, and he would either, if something bad had happened, he'd be yelling, and if something good had happened, he'd be excited. And this is how we spent our times, him talking and me going, And he would go into a store. He'd say, "I have to go get dinner now, so I'm going to go in the store." I said, "Okay, do you want to say goodbye?" "No, I don't want to say goodbye. I still have stuff to tell you." So he'd go in the store and he'd talk to me while he was shopping, and then he'd go to check out, and he'd always tell the woman or whoever was checking him out, "I'm talking to my sister." And I thought, even then, before he passed away, I thought, what better thing could you have as an old lady than a brother who is proudly telling the clerk that he's talking to his sister? That's it. I'm done. I have to. Come here. These are his great nieces. Okay, stand up here.
Hi, I'm Soraya, and Martin was the best great Uncle Martin anyone could ask for, and I'm really sad that he passed away. All my hopes and dreams of being an artist were from him, so I'll keep living my dream and be an artist.
This one was born on his birthday. She's a lot like him. Very annoying. No, just kidding. Go ahead. With force.
People, Uncle Martin was a good guy and he so deserved to live. Martin had good ideas for art and never backed down from anything. Love, Julian.
I'd like to pass the mic around. If there's anything that people want to add, and I'll just pass. It's funny when Leslie was mentioning all the things that Martin had done. I was going to make a list of all the things that he was interested in, all the things he did, and because I'd forgotten about. He wanted to build a wooden boat. The wooden boat was definitely. There's still the plans for the airplane in the garage that he was going to build, and there's his dad's race car that he was going to redo. The big orange piece of metal that's in the garage. I almost brought it today. The kids could have played in it. But there were just so many things. So I'm going to start over here. Is there anyone that would like to over here? We can just keep passing. Racers.
As always. Hi, my name's Nate Skerman, and I'm one racer. Brian and I worked with Martin at Art and Soul, and I had known him for about a month and a half or so before I started. You know, I designed that, right? And my mind flipped, because here was, you know, the man that created so much stuff that I had, you know, seen and enjoyed in my life. So I just thought that was really cool, and I'm really sad he's gone.
Wife. Okay, I met Martin when I was 16, and we went to his house. Mace took me over to his house a week and Friday. And I remember going in, meeting his dad, you know, seeing his home, and lots of cool artwork everywhere. And I remember his dad looking at me and going, "Wow, you're stacked." And I just thought, whoa, this is a very interesting family. It turned out Martin and I shared a lot of phone calls, and I'm probably assuming everybody else did as well. And that's kind of how we kept in communication over the years. We found out that our sons were both born very closely together. We lost contact for a few years, and all of a sudden we saw you guys with your baby at the Good Earth restaurant in Santa Rosa. And then it was reignited, and we had friendship as well. And I'll say this is tough, guys. Martin was always exceedingly supportive, and he always could listen. I mean, really listen to whatever I had to say. And I appreciated him on a lot of different levels. Yeah.
Swanson and fellow racers, and I think we'll all agree that Marty always had a great story to tell. I mean, he was just a consummate storyteller, and you know, every time we were all sitting around having a barbecue or you know, sitting around bench racing, you know, he was just the center of attention and just loved to tell a good story. He and I talked on Friday, right before he passed, and I heard Randy say the exact same comment. We talked a lot about the boat project he was working on, but the very last thing we talked about was Nick's career. He was just absolutely prouder than you can imagine, you know, that you were following in his footsteps as a graphic artist and game designer, and you know, that was the last thing we talked about. So I just want to make sure you knew that. But yeah, he's going to be missed. You know, as Lori said, we had some of the highs and lows. He always talked about family, and you know, he felt everybody was his family, and really truly did. And with that came some of the feuds and the disagreements that you would have, and then the next thing you know, you're laughing and having a shot of Jack and a couple beers together. So we'll have a little shot of Jack to remember him, and that's what I got.
Brett, and I've known Bucky a long time. Would anybody mind if I went up to there? I have something I've written for him. And I'm going to wear the hat in his honor. There were many times when he and I were the only ones that wore these kinds of hats. I didn't have it in junior high, so I guess maybe Bucky. I'm glad we started out with the razors. That was the thing I didn't know about Bucky, but I'm just going to read this because if I try to do it, I'll just ramble. Okay. Martin Cameron was my friend. I met him a million years ago in Southern California, Santa Monica, as I recall. For those of you here today who find discrepancies in my narrative, I invite you to correct me later, okay? At our initial meeting, Martin introduced himself to me as Bucky. He and I enjoyed much of the same popular culture: comic books, science fiction, fantasy movies, old television programs, and conventions. Over the years, there were wide gaps in time between our meetings. I went off and had a career as a comic book artist, and he was doing whatever he was doing, which was always wonderful. Even though there were gaps between our meetings, we always seemed to pick up right from where we had left off when we last met. Then there is our shared interest in driving. I love to drive. I always have, just for the pure, non-competitive pleasure of driving. But it wasn't until years into our friendship I found out Bucky loved to drive also, as a professional race car driver. And there was one time when we were roommates. He rented a room in the house I was living in. And I think it was during that time, but he and I carpooled up to SierraCon, which was a get-together that Doug Herring and Bridget McKenna used to have, up at their house in Ahwahnee. And one weekend, Bucky and I drove up there. During the long drive, Bucky and I talked of all the topics mentioned above, plus some others we had never talked about, including his experiences with professional race car driving. As I said, I love to drive, and in my firm belief that anything worth doing is worth doing well, I paid attention to Bucky's descriptions of race car driving etiquette and safety precautions. I learned and verified pretty much everything I knew about safe and enjoyable driving from Bucky. And Bucky was a good driver, I know. I watched him drive for 3.5 hours. And we talked about it the whole way. Bucky was good at everything he tried: driving, art and drawing, understanding computers and computer programs, meaningful conversation, or simply chatting. And he was really good at having fun. Unfortunately, there were times when he strived to be much more than good in some of these endeavors, and he pushed himself beyond his not inconsiderable limits. He often suffered feelings of insecurity and inadequacy because of his striving. I say unfortunate because he also believed, as I did, that anything worth doing was worth doing well, but he was often not satisfied, in his view, with a thing being just good, but in it not being exceptional and excellent. He recognized this quality in many of the exceptional friends he surrounded himself with, but I wish he had recognized this quality within himself more, because he was an exceptional person. He was one of those quality people we almost never meet. And I'm glad I met him. And he was my friend. I want to end my memory of Bucky with this. At one point in Bucky's life, I heard through other friends that Bucky didn't want to be called Bucky anymore, that he was instructing people to call him Martin. Maybe because Bucky was a childhood nickname and Martin wanted to feel more grown up, or maybe it was to mature more gracefully into adulthood or something. But I had trouble, even in absentia, with this development. Martin introduced himself to me as Bucky, and he was fond of referring to me by my nickname, Benji. It was a mutual agreement between us as friends to use pet names for each other. The next time I met Bucky, I asked him if he preferred me to call him Martin instead of Bucky. He told me that although he preferred to be called Martin, I could call him Bucky. Thanks, Bucky.
Hi, so my name's Joel Jefferson. I knew Martin back in the early mid-'80s. I was part of the Sacramento gang, as we used to refer to ourselves. I was roommates with Jeff Canfield, Lori's brother, for a few years. Hung out at Jim McLeod's house. Actually, one of the best memories that I have was watching Strange Brew, which was one of our favorite movies. Drinking Foster's Lager, which Bucky called oil can beer. And we used to take a lot of trips out to Toys R Us. And one summer, I recall, we came across a bunch of these really realistic looking toy guns. And this was before they made them with red tips and everything. And there was, I just looked it up actually on my phone. It was the Edison ZKZ35, which shot these yellow rubber hollow bullets. And if you ever find this little yellow rubber bullet hanging by itself in one of the boxes in his garage, it's from back then, because they ended up everywhere. And there were some great gun battles back in those days. So Martin's been a friend of mine, well, mid-'80s, so 30-odd years. We fell out of touch several times. Facebook brought us back into touch, as it does with us for many of our friends. So I have a couple of Bucky's original prints that he sold at some of the conventions back in the early 80s. The Wonderland Boulevard exit and the sunburn in Silicon Valley and those things. He was just a really incredible guy, and we're all a little bit less for him being gone.
But there's been a lot of great stories and a lot of things way I felt about it as well. I met Bucky back at, I'm Steve Purcell, back at LucasArts when we were up at Skywalker Ranch, and he sort of straddled the abyss between art and technology. He was a good hand holder for guys like me who were learning how to draw on a computer and never had the experience. And he knew everything. He knew everything on that side of it, but he had a part of an artist, so he understood what we were going through, trying to learn how to draw that way. But, I have a lot of warm memories of sharing an office back in the back of Skywalker Ranch with it was like being in the Cub Scouts together. Because we worked such long hours, and then, we'd go for hikes and we'd wander around the ranch, and we'd end up working till 11 at night to make up for all the time we goofed off, just playing together on Skywalker Ranch. But over the years, we were always trying to find time to get together, and we had a catchphrase, "Hey, we're going to get together sometime." And it was, few and far between. We would actually find something to get together and have coffee. I can't walk out of Pete's now without thinking we should be in there having a coffee, because whenever we get together and have those conversations, it was like putting on a warm sweater or something. It always made me feel smarter and more clever than I really am. The way you would laugh at my most obscure jokes. And so I really appreciate that. And we had a friendship, like most of you, it seems, that was based on a sense of humor and how much he loved to laugh. And I was we had a running joke where he gave me a box of self-vinyl paints, and when I was, he never got around to using them to do his personal work, and gave them to me, and I never got around to using them either. So I gave them back to him, and then I think he kept them for a year, and then he gave them back to me. Fortunately, they're still over at Lori's house, so I guess I win. But the other thing that kind of gratified me in that vein is, there was a lot of talk about the double rainbow, which that was his last day. It seemed like he was in a good place. And I remember seeing that posting, and I made a lame joke. I said, on the west side, we made a single rainbow. And that was our last interaction, that I got to joke back with him, and then I learned the next morning that he wasn't with us anymore. And so I found out from when my dad passed away that, we don't remember people from monuments or, some marker somewhere where it's the way we kind of find ourselves reacting to things, or it's like that person is impacting us in some way. I've already found that I sort of see things in a different way because of having known Bucky. So thank you, Bucky, for being a great friend.
Can you hear me now? I've known Bucky for a long, long time. We used to get together and go to a pub, and everybody there knew us, and we would take our paper and our pencils and erasers, and the barmaids would bring us free beer because we were considered some kind of local color. We got quite a few free drinks that way. But the thing about Bucky now is that I was getting back together with him. This last month, we started spending Sundays together watching bad movies and talking about old times. And I started helping him a little bit on this project he was working with Bob Vardaman with. And he was feeling so good that last weekend. He was laughing and happy, and he just seemed to be in his body. He seemed to be there. And I'm glad that I had that last weekend with him. So anyway, that's...
One thing that I'm Debbie. One thing that you might not know about Martin, he makes a wonderful bridesmaid and a best man, because in December 21st, 1983, Jim and I went to the courthouse in Sacramento and got married, and Martin went with us. And then the whole wedding party went to Carlos Murphy's afterwards. And that's a the bridesmaids, the best man, well, he was role of two people, but that was a really fun time. That's kind of a fond memory we have of. And also to my kids, he was always known as Uncle Buck, and he would always threaten to make the big pancakes. And so, yeah, and my family, the kids were really, really sad when they found out that day when you called. They all came over that night, and I mean, he truly was like an uncle to them. They had grown up with him at our home a lot, and he was, I have to say, that last day, he was the Bucky that was just so funny, so fun. He was just, you know, the Bucky that we remembered in the earlier times. Before things, he kind of went through that dark period, but like Jim said, that last month, it was just so fun to have him around.
Hi, I'm Gage Woods. I'm Nick's friend. I've known Nick since I was in 3rd grade, and the first time I met Marty was on a field trip, and I fell, and he picked me up, and he's like, let's just keep going, like, it's no big deal. And I still wasn't really great friends with Nick, so I didn't know Marty that well, and then as elementary school went on, Marty became like a dad to me. His entire family is my family. I had a tough childhood, and Marty every time would give me the greatest hugs, and he acted like I wanted the hugs, but you know, he'd be like, oh, come here, I know I need that hug. Every hug, I could feel like he wanted just as much as I did. He was indescribable. How much he meant And I don't know how long it's going to take to get over his loss. When I went to Nick's house, it was so weird. It was quiet. I missed his laughter. I missed his sigh. I'd spend nights after nights at Nick's house, and he'd go, "You guys are still up, what are you doing?" And we were playing board games and video games, and he'd act like, "Oh, you guys should be asleep," but he'd sit down next to us, chat, he'd play the board games with us, and we'd watch shows together, or we'd watch shows that, you know, you wouldn't expect. He watched a lot of anime, and he didn't talk to it a lot, but every once in a while he'd go, "So Gage, I know Nick's not this big a fan, but you need to really watch this. I'm sure you'll really appreciate it." And boy, was he such a special person. Thank you.
I met Bucky for lunch about maybe 3 years ago, and we just had a great time. We got along wonderfully, and we knew we needed to connect and work together. So I'm a filmmaker, and I do these commercial projects, so I brought him on to animate some shows, and I think the wildest and wackiest was we did this bikers video where a fellow's car got hit. He got really angry. And then at the end, there was this thing where he would lie down in his pajamas and be comforted and mellow. So what Marty had done was he created these flowers and these wonderful animation of flying people. But the guy I was working with, Edwin Heaven, who was sort of a punk rock manager, was so demanding and would drive Marty crazy. Marty would call me late at night, you know, I just can't do this. And I said, just pull through, and he created what I thought was one of the most wonderful, brilliant projects. And if we had a screen here, I would love to show it to you because it was Marty that really made that happen. And I was heading up to Katati on the Sunday before he passed. I had done a little film for this group of musicians and artists called Artista, and I invited him to the party. And Marty sounded great and said, "Hey, I'd love to be there. I'm going to try to make it." And then I heard that he had passed. And yeah, he was amazing for the short time I knew him, and I wish I had come up to Petaluma more and spent more time with him. But he is always going to have a place, and I'll put together a little reel of everything that he's done for us and just give it, and we can put it up on the site. It'd be great. Thank you.
This thing doesn't work. My name is Kyle. I grew up 2 houses down the street from Nick. Very hard.
Hello. I broke it. It's very hard to talk about Martin in past tense. He was such a big personality in all of our lives.
I don't do good with this stuff. You know, every time I pick up a book, I watch a sci-fi show. Anytime I play a video game, I think of him. He's a cornerstone of my personality. He is a big reason that I am who I am today. And I think it shows a lot that, not a lot of you know me, but I think it shows a lot that I have emotions because I'm not a very emotional person. very hard to think that he's not here. But it is very, very welcoming, and it makes me very happy to see that he has all of these friends and all of these people that care about him, because I knew that his life was a struggle and that he was such a very powerful person. Thank you all for coming here. Thank you for showing love. And
I gotta go to sleep already. Okay. It's good to see you. I'll call you if you think you can shoot. Okay, cool.
My name is Rob Clark. I worked with Martin in 1999. It was the height of the dot-com boom, and I started working at Namco. He was living in Petaluma, I was living in Pacifica, and he needed somebody to commute with him because that drive was just awful. 2 hours is generous. I mean, it was more like 2.5 or 3 for him. I was immediately revered with Martin because in college, the game I played with my roommates every single night and in between studying was X-Wing. So when I found out that he worked on X-Wing, my idol. One day I'll be like Martin and I'll get to work with Lucasfilm, you know? And I mean that sincerely. He was a great friend in Namco, and after a few months, I went through what was probably the hardest breakup of my life. I was crushed. Namco's in San Jose. It was a very insular place. There was nothing around. He was going through some hard stuff too. But every single day, he would come over to my desk and say, "How you doing?" And he'd give me one of those gigantic bear hugs. And we'd take a couple of laps around the building and he'd ask me what I needed. How was I doing? We would go eat lunch at the Roach Coach, which was a Mexican truck run by a Chinese family. So it was an interesting mixture of chicken and salsa and a burrito. It was just a strange place to be, but at every moment, Martin was right next to me, making sure that I was okay and had what I needed. And I'll never forget that, because he got me through one of the hardest times in my adult life. So it was an honor to have him, Nick, Lori, you guys came to my wedding, and to be able to share that with him and show that I had made it through it. And then to be able to eventually work at Lucasfilm, and so he could see that I became the guy that I wanted to be in his footsteps. I feel honored to have known Martin. I can't believe that he's gone, and I'll miss him tremendously. And I'm impressed to see so many people here who love him as well. Thank you.
So again, I just wanted you all to know that I may have not been part of his life I've been a part of his life for about 2.5 years or so. I haven't really had much contact with my family. He's my dad's brother, so he looks exactly like my dad. So when I met him, this floored me. I wanted to vomit on myself. I was like, oh my goodness, all the males in our family are pretty much all gone except for him. So he was the one that kind of opened me up and made me trust people and humans, and the fact that I was crazy, had so many ideas pouring out of my body that he was the only one that could keep up. That could call him and be like, "Hey uncle, I got this crazy idea." And he'd be like, "All right, Evan, let's go." They're like, "All right, well, I want to dress up cannabis and make a film out of it." And he was like, "All right." This man was so willing to do anything my intelligence would come up with. He literally let me dress up cannabis flowers and create characters out of them and help me create a secondary world that nobody had ever created. He didn't ever let me touch a section and said that is taboo. Don't let your brain go there. He really just let me open up and trust people. And unfortunately, my son Chaos didn't get to meet him so much, but I put him into racing and into automotive because he was what I knew. My dad was an automotive guy, my grandpa was an automotive guy, my Uncle Martin was an automotive guy. So chaos became that too, and I can really, I love seeing what you've done, Nick, and Lori, you guys are awesome. I'm really glad to have met you again, and I am super stoked to have gotten to know one of the last couple of years. It was super badass.
Hi, I'm coming on the show, and I was hired onto LucasArts as the manager back in 1990. And I remember coming into the department, and there was 14 artists, and there was 13 of them were men, and only one other woman besides myself. And I remember Bucky he immediately took me under his wing, and we would go out to lunch, and I remember how much he loved telling me all the backstory on everybody. He was like, yeah. And one of the people that he really just thought was so amazing was Steve Purcell. And he was the one who told me that, Steve Purcell was really the boss that we wanted to have, but he turned the job down. And you got the job instead. But Steve Purcell is so amazing. He is like a god. And I would just continually hear about Steve Purcell. But he loved everybody in that art department. It was like the boys' club. And then there was Avril, the other woman. And then there was me. I was kind of the outlier. But he loved Ken, and he loved Brent, and he loved Leela, and he loved Frank. I know you weren't there, but oh my gosh, he loved everybody in that department so much and wanted to make sure that I did not do anything to hurt any of them, especially Steve Purcell. And so I knew it was going to blow his mind when he found out that Steve and I were secretly dating. We kept it on the down low for a long time, partly because we didn't know how Bucky was going to handle it. Well, he got over it when we finally let it out, and we ended up getting married. And we stayed in touch, and anyway, fast forward about 10 years, and I'm not in the games business anymore, and he's not in the games business anymore, but I'm starting a children's museum. And I remember him calling me up and just saying, "What is it that you need, Colette?" Because I was starting it from nothing and no money and just from out of the back of our Honda Odyssey van, making our own exhibits and stuff like that. And Bucky just called me up. He said, "What do you need?" And I can't even remember what it was, but we kind of came up with some scheme about what he was going to get for the Children's Museum, and he just worked so hard to find that. I don't even remember what it was now. I don't think it really worked out. But it was just, I guess what I remember about Bucky was, first of all, his fierce loyalty to his friends. He loved his friends. And boy, once you were in his friend, you were his friend, but he was going to stand by you no matter what. And then the other thing was just his generosity of spirit. He just wanted to help. He wanted to just help everybody. And that was just really wonderful about him. And then the third thing, Brent, about him wanting to not be called Bucky anymore. I just could never stop calling him Bucky. And I remember I would tell the colleagues at the Children's Museum, well, there's this guy, Martin. And they'd be, "What? Bucky?" Well, he was named Bucky, but now he wants to be called Martin, and I don't know. Anyway, Bucky is I could never stop calling him Bucky. He will always be Bucky in my heart. And every time I think of Bucky, I can't help but smile because of everything you guys have said. He just had this big laugh, big heart, and just big everything. And I'm just so glad that I got to know him and that he was the one that when I started at LucasArts, he took me under his wing and he really made me feel welcome there. And I will never forget Bucky. So.
Hi, so I'm probably going to be a little bit younger than everybody else here. Martin has known me since I was born. My family would go over to the Camerons every single year, and we had the best ice cream in the world for the 4th of July. And Martin really did become a big influence in my life. There's one thing that he told me when I was about 10 years old that I didn't quite understand until recently. There are a few things I remember about this day when he came over. The first of which is that he made me cover my ears so he could tell my parents a joke, which I still haven't heard, by the way. The next thing is I've always been an animal collector, and I had just gotten a couple of new baby goats. So I was introducing Martin to my new goats, and I remember he looked at the goats, and he looked at me and he said, "I have never liked goats." And I'm like, "Why not? They're so cute." And he's like, "Goats have devil eyes. They have octopus eyes. Look at the way their pupils are formed." And I honestly never understood that until recently. I'm still an animal collector, and my family took on a rescue goat. This rescue goat likes to kill people. She, I'm not kidding, has pinned me down to the ground before. She's a menace. But I remember after we had her for a couple of weeks, I finally looked in her eyes, and I went over to my parents and I said, "Mom, I understand what Martin meant."
Thank you. My name's Gordon Garb. Bucky, sometime in the early 80s, we were part of the same Amateur Press Association effort, SLANAPA, the Slanderous Amateur Press Association, where everyone who was a member would contribute their own publication every month, and then the next month you would comment back and forth, and we would become friends that way. And then I met him in person at some convention in Phoenix, I think in 1981, 82, WesterCon or something. And I had just gotten a Walkman, a Sony Walkman. And it was cool. And I was walking around listening to music and not hearing people. And somehow, with my Walkman on, ran into Bucky in the flesh. And we had already been friends, and we became fast friends. I ended up in LA starting in around 1982, working at a company doing computer graphics, special effects. Bucky really wanted to join us. I arranged for him to meet the manager of our digital modeling group, Kevin Rafferty, and he and Kevin hit it off, and Kevin needed people. He had an open rec, so everything was going great. And this is where I learned about office politics, because I hadn't kept the head of HR in the loop, and she was unhappy that I'd gone around her, so she's made sure Bucky didn't get hired. He ended up around then, he had moved down to Santa Monica, became my roommate for the first time, and ended up doing a lot of kind of menial jobs in the art industry. He worked making photostats and stuff like that, but he always maintained his upbeat spirit and was always creative and always looking for that opportunity. There was one convention somewhere around where we were just kind of hanging out, and I saw something, and I said, "Okay, Martin, we need to get on this next elevator." He's like, no, I want to keep looking here. "No, you don't understand. We need to get on this elevator." And I kind of pushed, and we got on the elevator, and I was like, "Oh, Martin, this is my friend Rick Sternbach. Rick, this is Martin. You should know him. You guys have a lot in common, etc." And that's how they met. Rick was one of Martin's favorite artists at the time, and they became fast friends. And when we were living in LA, we would go hang out at Rick and Asna's house, and Martin and Rick would watch anime, and you know, yeah. Anyway, that, and anyway, they remained close friends. Fast forward, Martin moves back up here, and he gets the job at LucasArts, and he was so proud and so happy. Oh man, he gave me a tour a couple of times, and yeah, he was just beaming and proud. Eventually, he ended up my roommate again, moving in with me down in Sunnyvale. And the fact that we lived together twice and never killed each other shows you what, you know, how much, yeah. Because Bucky was a wonderful person, and he was talented, and he had this amazing laugh and this terrific sense of humor, and he was also sometimes a pain. And but I knew that whatever, you know, when he got down or when he got frustrated or whatever, that he would bounce back, and so I was happy to, you know, just be his friend. Man, as I heard someone say, it's really hard to talk in the past tense. One of the things I always did, I like to go to estate sales, garage sales, whatever, and you know, keep my eye open for stuff that's like, oh, that's so-and-so would like that, and a lot of the times it's, ooh, you know, Bucky would like that, and you know, I'd pick up a book on airbrushing, you know, halfway as a gag, or I was on a trip in New Orleans in November and went to a thrift store, and there was a you know, a shirt from some car shop, you know, with some random name, Joe or Bob or something on it. And I was like, oh man, Bucky would love that. And it's sitting in the back of my car still. Yeah, just what a wonderful friend, you know, over the years. I'm gonna miss him. I don't think I'm gonna let go. Also, his recent collaborator, Bob Vardaman, couldn't be here, but wanted me to give his condolences and best wishes to everyone. And also I ran into Mike McLaughlin a week ago, and he also sends his best. Another story while Lori's walking over here. When Bucky was living in Santa Monica, you know, everyone knows how much Bucky loved cars. And he ended up buying this used, oh, I don't even remember what it was. Volvo. The Volvo. He called it the cockroach. And he was like, he's going to fix it up and make it great. And instead, it almost killed him because there was a leak in the carburetor or something, so fuel was being squirted onto the top of the engine near where the electrical short was and the spark from something was, and yeah. Luckily he saw it in time, but
There's a couple people that also sent some words to share, so I'm going to read those. And I just want to encourage people, if they have thoughts they'd like to send, or stories or pictures, please just send them to us, and then we'll have those also. So speaking of Rick Sternbach, he sent something to read. It's a bit difficult to pick and choose things I remember about Martin, since they all started flooding back when I heard that he had left us. Gordon Garb reminded me that he introduced me and Bucky, I've really known him by that moniker more than any other, in an elevator in a convention in the 1980s, and we hit it off pretty quickly, since we eventually talked about all the interests we had in common, like art and airbrushes and science fiction and animation and building models and video games and World War II airplanes and racing cars. The fun times were punctuated by barbecue and beer and Japanese food. There's another one that Martin loved and Rick too. Trips to Little Tokyo and model shops and catching the last movies in anime and the fish ties, which were at our wedding. You can see them in the pictures there. I admired his sense of whimsy and humor, and the image of his Cheshire cat from back in the day stand out still. I think it nicely defined him. Even after he got into modeling with the computer, his characters and creatures were satisfyingly weird. I always got the sense he wanted to try different artistic tools and techniques and styles in order to bring into existence a new sketch or painting or CG render and have fun doing it. I applaud his creative drive. I thank Martin for accepting me into his equally creative circle of friends and the connections that continue by modern technology in the absence of face-to-face meetings. That last part is my fault, but I'm glad we've at least been able to stay in touch. I'm thankful that in recent years, he and I had some marathon phone calls. Through Martin, or just being in his orbit, I was able to meet people like Lori, Jim McLeod, Dave Bengal, Doug and Bridget, Marty, Lex, Leela, Ken, Jeff, Torin, Martin's pals at Lucasfilm, and the like-minded people in the Wolfpack. And many more, I'm sure. Pretty amazing with what a single introduction can lead to. I miss you, my friend Rick. And before I forget, I want to thank Eric for filming this. I was going to forget. So I want to read a story from, because his high school friends, Steve and the two Steves, Steve Lady and Steve Dooner couldn't make it. And I just want to read a little bit that Steve Dooner sent us. This is a story that shows you some things that Leslie was talking about, how nutty they were. In college, Martin and I were still in theater, primarily doing lighting. We made money working for the college, running the theater for groups that would rent it out for an event. On Christmas Eve in 1974, we were sitting in the projection booth while some musician was serenading a full house of 725 people as the rain poured outside. He was standing in front of the main curtain on the thrust stage for his performance. He took a break for intermission, and Martin and I made our way backstage from the projection booth by walking across the catwalk in the ceiling. As we descended backstage, we encountered a wall of smoke. One of the dimmers had burned a winding and filled the stage area with smoke. We were 18 years old. We were responsible for everyone and everything in that theater. I called the fire department. Sacramento hadn't installed 911 yet in those days, and explained the situation. I told them we isolated the dimmer and removed the power, and that we had over 700 people in the theater. So please don't come with lights and sirens, but will someone please come and look at this and tell us if we're doing the right thing? They said they would send someone over. Walking back toward the stage, I heard the sirens. Looking out the back door, we saw fire engine after fire engine pulling into the campus, lights flashing and sirens blaring. They were deploying hoses and rushing toward the building. Martin calmly looked out at the scene with me and said, "Oh, we're going to get killed over this." The fire chief came in and told us to evacuate the theater. The singer had begun his second act. Martin walked out and parted the curtains, wearing a blue down coat. Talk about detail, people here. Blue down coat. The singer had his back to him, and the audience started laughing when Martin stepped out. If looks could kill, when that guy turned and saw Martin. Martin calmly said there was a fire backstage and that the fire department was there, and boom, the lights went out. The fire department turned off the dimmer rack. The house lights kicked on a few seconds later. We got the theater cleared, and after a while of looking at a smoking dimmer and talking about what TV shows each station had been watching, they let us bring the people back in. The singer finished his show, and Martin and I watched the fire department roll away in the rain. By the time school resumed in January, the rumors were rampant. Cameron and Dooner had burned the place to the ground, or marauding firefighters were hacking through doors with their axes. Boy, did we have some explaining to do. At the end of the day, I became a story in the school paper, and Martin drew one of his great cretin cartoons of the episode, showing he and I cowering with a smoking dimmer as the fire department charged through the door with axes held high and hoses leaking water everywhere. Our dads loved to celebrate St. Patrick's Day, as Martin's dad was a Scot and my dad Irish. They would playfully exchange insults and jokes while drinking Irish whiskey or scotch. In our later years, Martin and I would repeat the ritual when we could, raising a glass to our dads, who, like us, were friends forever. Here's to you, Martin. I have a huge hole in my heart where you once lived. Thank you for all the fun and wild times. And that was from Steve Dinger. So, believe it or not, we're coming to an end. It's been such wonderful stories. I wanted to point out in the coloring book is a list of huge interest next to the last page. So you can check out his favorites of music or humor or people or books or movies, TV, and artists. When I was going through some of these things, because Martin told us that he kept all of his passwords in a little black book. And we were looking for that. And before I read those, this is something I said at my brother's celebration. I'm saying it again. Give your passwords to somebody that you know and that you trust. Subscribe to 1Password and get all your passwords in there. Yes, you can.
Yeah, so when my uncle passed away, he used a password manager because he was very security centric, but he didn't leave the password into that password manager anywhere, which meant we had no access to any digital files he had, and that's still true to this day. We thought that was going to happen to my dad, but luckily not only was his computer on, but pinned right above his computer was his password to 1Password, which had his password to everything. So
except his phone.
Except his phone. You know,
so maybe he wants to.
Maybe one is going to be private, but it's really a lifesaver. And with all the stories about all the digital stuff my dad did, like there's so many photos, so many videos, just infinite stuff. It's important to keep around because your family will want it.
And we're not getting a kickback from 1Password. But just check it out, yeah. But before that, and the other thing is, this is awful, but make a will. Make a will, everybody. Just do it.
Yeah, it's also awful, but this is now the second time.
Yeah, so do it. So when I was looking for all those passwords, I mean, Martin had so many. I know all you artists out there, the amount of books you have of art and drawing and everything. He had so many, and he had so many books that he wrote in and kept diaries of. But also on the people list here, he wrote out, this is so incredible to me, people who are important to me, not in order of importance. Albert Einstein, Robert Oppenheimer, Richard Feynman, Dan Gurney, Jackie Stewart, Niki Lauda, Carl Sagan, Werner von Braun, Manfred von Richthofen, Werner Voss, I don't know that one, I have to look that one up, Ed Roth, Robert Heinlein, Rick Griffin, and they're on here too. But to have it in his handwriting was just really so cool. And as somebody else who talked about how ambitious he was, and he didn't always live up to his expectations. This is the kind of people he wanted to work. I mean, this is it. And I often think the men of the World War II, the sons of the World War II generation had a really hard time because there's so much expectations of what their fathers did. Huge expectations. And Martin's family was all military, and his mom was involved in it too. Where women, we of the World War II, generation of children, we could be different from our mothers quite easily. We could just do different things. But I think that guys had a really hard time. That's my opinion anyway, because he just had huge things he wanted to do. So I want to thank everybody for coming again. And I want to just mention a couple of the things here. There's thanks for bringing food, and I wasn't going to thank at the end, but I'm doing it anyway. Because I did at the beginning, I'm doing it anyway. And there's still plenty of food left. We have the room for a while longer, so I know it's getting late, but if people want to stick around, we have that. What? Oh, I will. Thank you. I will. And if you didn't sign in, please do. There's the sign-in book there so we can contact people. And also, the other table with the flowers is where if anybody wants to make a drawing, or the girls are doing it right now, or just sign that poster board, it'd be really great if they want to do that. I'm just trying to make sure I got everything here. And I'm going to mention that. Check out the tables. I got that. I got that. I got that. So let's see. Oh. Will you power this on? Oh. So one of the things that a lot of people ask, like what they could give to, like a group or whatever, in memory of Martin. We had a really hard time with that. It's just the power button, not the top, and it'll say power on when it comes on. There you go. Okay. And all we could really think of is to encourage people in our lives to make art ourselves, to everybody to make art, and to encourage people to make art. So whether it's doing it yourself or supporting a friend or supporting Patreon or Indiegogo or GoFundMe or Kickstarter, all those things to keep that art and that creativity going. Because that was, those of us who know a lot of artists, lived with a lot of artists, supported a lot of artists, man, it's hard for artists to make a living. I mean, as you get older, it's really, really hard. Nobody really wants you. I mean, it's hard. It's really hard. But we can just keep doing that our whole lives, and in these very trying times we live in right now, art is what we need. I think it's one of the main things. Let's see, also, I decided, this is pretty silly, but as I said, in these trying times, we need unicorns, and we need rainbows. And we're so happy that was the picture that Martin was so happy to take was the double rainbow. So in honor of that, we are going to play a song, but in honor of that, we have a special dessert today, which is ice cream in rainbow cups. And so we have his favorite ice cream, which we're going to serve cups, and then another ice cream, which we'll do in the back. Martin's song. Yeah. Oh, also, we have some good quotes in the back too. Mel Brooks, which we found some really good Mel Brooks quotes. And this one we thought was really, really like Martin. Tragedy is when I cut my finger. Comedy is when you walk into an open sewer and die. And there's another one that's so Martin. If you're quiet and you're not living, you've got to be noisy and colorful and lively. So we thought those were good. So at my brother's celebration, we played the ever popular Monty Python song, which Devin kindly typed up in the whole thing, and then we decided not to use it because we thought it fit more really to have Jimmy Buffett. So we're just going to go on a Jimmy Buffett song. Jimmy Buffett will play a second sound.
Calling parents.
Great to meet you.